So imagine this. You're browsing the internet and don't want anyone to know where you are, what you're doing, or even which sites you're visiting. That's essentially where Tor comes into the picture. Tor stands for the Onion Router. At its core, it's a way to use the internet anonymously, and it all started in the early 2000s as a project funded by the US government.
Wait, funded by the government? That seems kind of ironic, doesn't it? An anonymity tool backed by a government.
It does feel a bit counterintuitive. But here's the point. It was originally developed to protect sensitive communications, particularly for government agents. The concept they invented, called onion routing, was all about layering encryption. Picture an onion, layers upon layers of security. And as your data moves around, each layer gets peeled away by a different relay, hiding where you came from, as well as where you're headed.
Okay, I'm trying to wrap my head around this. So, my data would hop around the world, one layer at a time. That sounds like a digital relay race.
That's a great way to describe it. Volunteers around the globe operate thousands of relays, and your internet traffic gets routed randomly through a series of 3 relays: the entry point, the middle relay, and the exit node, before it reaches its destination on the web. The beauty of it is you remain anonymous because no single relay knows both your identity and what you're accessing.
Well, that's sneaky brilliant. Is this why Tor gets labelled as, part of the whole dark web thing?
That's exactly what I first thought when I came across Tor myself some years back. I saw it mentioned in articles about all these shadowy things happening online and assumed it was purely a tool for illicit activities. Turns out that's a massive misconception. Yes, Tor can access parts of the web that aren't indexed by traditional search engines, but its main aim is privacy, not crime.
Fascinating. So it's not just for, dodgy dealings on the internet then?
Not at all. It's used by people like journalists who need to communicate safely, especially when they're in countries with heavy censorship. But I'll get into those examples later. Here we're just setting the stage with the basics, how Tor works mechanically and why it was designed in the first place.
So it's like a shield for people who need some online privacy, but it's a lot more sophisticated than just clearing your browser history.
Exactly. It's about making sure not even the websites you visit can see your IP address. Plus, the encryption layers mean that even if someone intercepts part of your data, it's essentially gibberish without the rest of the layers, or the right keys to decrypt them.
Right. And you've got all these volunteers running the system? That's amazing to think about, really.
Well, it's what keeps the network global and scalable. That's the community-powered element of Tor, and it's one of the reasons it remains such a powerful technology even today.
Speaking of the global community keeping Tor alive, let's dive into its real-life impact. Think about journalists, investigative reporters, and whistleblowers. People who might genuinely depend on anonymity to stay safe. In countries with strict censorship and surveillance, Tor enables them to securely access information, connect with others, and share vital stories that might otherwise remain untold.
Right. I remember reading about journalists covering protests in, places where free speech isn't a thing. But surely, it's not all noble causes, right?
Absolutely, and that's where things get complex. For every activist using Tor to avoid oppressive regimes, there are also people exploiting this same anonymity for criminal purposes. It's a double-edged sword. Various studies have revealed parts of the dark web, accessible through Tor, are hosts to some truly disturbing activities, from human trafficking to black market drug sales.
That's chilling. It must make things really difficult for authorities, doesn't it?
Exactly. The anonymity Tor provides often ties the hands of law enforcement. They can't just track someone through standard IP addresses. For instance, let's talk about one notable case, Operation Anonymous. This was an international crackdown on illegal marketplaces operating through Tor. Authorities exploited vulnerabilities within some onion services to identify and seize servers. It wasn't just a tech battle. It required patience, resources, and, frankly, some mistakes on the criminals' parts.
So they actually managed to shut some of it down. That's encouraging. But doesn't it just make the bad actors adapt faster next time?
Exactly. There's this constant game of cat and mouse. Every exploit gets patched and criminals find new ways to outsmart the system. But here's a curious thought. While these breakthroughs highlight the risks of Tor's misuse, they also showcase its resilience. It's not the tool itself causing harm, it's how people choose to use it.
So Tor is more like a neutral tool. Anonymity by itself isn't inherently good or bad, right?
Spot on. Tor's core mission is privacy. It was never intended to support criminal behaviour, but unfortunately, tools created for freedom will invariably attract those looking to exploit them. I mean, is that the tool's fault? Or society's?
That's a tough question. But let me ask you this. What's Tor doing now to stay ahead? Are there any big updates to, protect legitimate users while still fighting these challenges?
Great question. One of the most noteworthy updates recently is something that's genuinely shifted the landscape for Tor. It's called a proof of work defense, and it was introduced specifically to help onion services, those private websites accessible only via the Tor network, deal with denial of service attacks. Essentially, it forces every connection attempt to prove it's legitimate by completing a small computational task. It's like saying, earn your spot before you enter, which slows down malicious attackers from swarming the system.
Okay, that sounds incredibly clever. But does it add any burden on, regular users like you and me? Are we going to feel a slowdown too?
Good question. And no, not particularly. The tasks are designed to be light enough to go unnoticed by legit users, but tough enough to frustrate attackers trying to overwhelm the network. It's part of this ongoing cat and mouse game. Every innovation is about making life harder for attackers without disrupting the ordinary folks trying to protect their privacy.
That's reassuring. But since we're talking about risks, I know people still worry about traffic correlation attacks. How does that fit into the picture?
Yes, traffic correlation. This is sort of a perennial weakness, not just of Tor, but of most low-latency anonymity systems. If someone is monitoring both ends of your connection, the point where your data enters the Tor network and where it exits, they could match the timing and patterns to figure out who you are and what you're doing. Now, let me emphasize, this isn't trivial. It requires serious resources, often reserved for state-level actors like governments. But the risk is always there.
And I guess that's where malicious exit nodes come into play. Like if one of those relays in the network is up to no good.
Exactly. Malicious exit nodes can intercept data leaving the network, especially if users aren't careful to encrypt traffic through HTTPS, for instance. What's crucial to understand here is that Tor provides anonymity, but not necessarily end-to-end encryption unless users take additional precautions. Risks like this highlight the need for being informed about the tools you're using.
Right. Actually, my cousin works in cybersecurity, and she's always banging on about this stuff. She says anonymity networks like Tor are a double-edged sword, but she's fascinated by how they've become this battleground between privacy advocates and attackers.
That sums it up well. Tools like Tor empower people in oppressed regions, journalists, even everyday folks wanting to avoid being tracked by advertisers. But then those same tools can be exploited by bad actors. It's not a flaw in Tor, but a reality of how technology mirrors society. The onus is on us to understand these tools and use them responsibly.
Sounds like by using Tor wisely, you're not just protecting your own privacy, you're also, in a way, strengthening the network for everyone else who really depends on it.
Spot on. Whether it's activists breaking free from censorship or anyone just wishing for a bit more online privacy, Tor continues to be a vital tool. Does it have challenges? Absolutely. But like any meaningful technological innovation, the benefits massively outweigh the risks when used conscientiously.
And on that note, thank you for joining us. Remember, it's not just about anonymity, it's about what you do with it. Take care, everyone.
Perfectly said. On that closing thought, we'll see you next time. Stay curious and stay safe.